I am Maya, 32 years old, and I recently attended the wedding of the decade. I navigated past 300 of Chicago's elite, only to find my place setting outside the ballroom, shoved into a hallway next to the kitchen trash cans. When my sister saw me staring at it, she smirked and told me my aggressive aesthetic did not fit her new husband's old money vibe. I did not scream or cause a scene. I simply left a very special wedding gift on the garbage lid and walked out. Within minutes, her perfect fairy tale collapsed into a nightmare. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic relatives that you are not the one to play with. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, my parents, Pastor Thomas and First Lady Eleanor, were obsessed with respectability politics. To them, appearance was everything, and the congregation's opinion was the absolute law. I never fit their mold. I was born with a rich, dark complexion and an uncompromising personality. My younger sister Chloe was the golden child. With her lighter skin, loose curls, and desperate need for social validation, she was exactly the daughter my parents wanted to showcase. While I spent my 20s quietly building a career in private equity, turning bankrupt luxury assets into gold mines, Chloe spent hers chasing status. Her ultimate prize was Preston Sterling, a 34-year-old white man, claiming to be the heir to a massive Chicago real estate fortune. My parents treated Preston like a deity. He was their ticket into a world they had always coveted. The wedding was held at the Belmont Estate, a historic and breathtakingly expensive property that screamed generational wealth. When I arrived, the circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. I walked through the mahogany doors into a foyer dripping with crystal. The guest list was a who is who of the city's black elite, mingled with Preston's supposedly aristocratic relatives. Church members nodded politely at me, their eyes scanning my tailored emerald gown with subtle disapproval. I was too independent, too much of a reminder of the roots my parents were trying desperately to bury under expensive tulle and champagne. I made my way to the ornate seating chart. I traced my finger down the alphabetical list, finding Chloe's new in-laws at table 1, my parents at table 2, and various church elders occupying the prime real estate near the dance floor. I finally found my name, Maya, table 42. The ballroom tables stopped at 35. Confused, I asked a passing waiter where to find table 42. He gave me a look of deep pity, hesitated for a moment, and then pointed toward the heavy swinging doors that led to the catering kitchen. I pushed through the doors, leaving the string quartet behind. The service hallway was chaotic, smelling sharply of industrial bleach and roasted meat. Waiters rushed past me carrying heavy trays. And there, tucked right next to the kitchen doors, and a row of large plastic trash cans, was a small folding table. A single folding chair was pushed underneath it. On top of the bare plastic surface sat a beautifully calligraphed card. Maya. My stomach dropped. It was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. They had literally thrown me away. Before I could process the cruelty of the moment, the kitchen doors swung open again. Chloe stepped into the hallway, careful to hold up the hem of her custom-beaded wedding gown. Our mother Eleanor followed closely behind her, adjusting her ridiculous fascinator hat. They did not look surprised to see me standing next to the garbage. In fact, Chloe looked profoundly satisfied. "Are you seriously going to stand there and pout?" Chloe asked, crossing her arms. I stared at her, my voice eerily calm despite the fire burning in my chest. "You put my seat next to the trash cans, Chloe. At your own wedding." She rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh. "Look, Maya Preston's family is very traditional. They are Chicago old money. This entire event has a very specific aesthetic, and we have to maintain a certain image." I waited for her to finish, knowing exactly where this was going. "You are just so loud," Chloe continued, waving her hand dismissively at me. "Your natural hair, that dark dress, your whole aggressive energy. It just does not fit the elegant vibe we are going for today. Preston's parents are already uncomfortable enough without you intimidating their guests. You can sit here out of the way, or you can just go ahead and call an Uber home. It really does not matter to me." Eleanor stood there watching her youngest daughter humiliate me. I looked at my mother, waiting for the righteous, God-fearing woman who preached about family unity every Sunday to intervene. Instead, she smoothed the front of her expensive dress and avoided my gaze. "She is right, Maya," my mother muttered, her voice laced with quiet disdain. "You have always refused to soften yourself. We are trying to blend two very different worlds today. We need to present a refined, agreeable front to the Sterling family. Your presence is just a bit too overwhelming for polite company." The message was crystal clear. To them, my dark skin and refusal to shrink myself to make white people comfortable was a liability. They were willing to hide me next to discarded food scraps just to appease strangers. I looked at Chloe, taking in her triumphant smirk, and then at my mother, who was already turning her back on me to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. For 32 years, I had swallowed their disrespect to keep the peace. But standing there, breathing in the smell of garbage, my familial loyalty snapped permanently. I walked away from the table completely done playing the dutiful, quiet, invisible scapegoat. I had barely taken 2 steps down the service hallway when a sharp grip clamped onto my wrist. I spun around to find my mother glaring at me, her manicured nails digging into my skin. With her free hand, she snatched the silver-wrapped gift box right out of my arms. "Where do you think you are going?" Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with that familiar venom she usually reserved for closed doors. "You are not going to storm out of here and embarrass this family in front of the Sterling relatives. You will sit exactly where your sister put you, and you will be grateful we even let you through the front gate." I looked down at her hand, grabbing my wrist, then back up to her face. "Let go of me," I said, my voice dangerously low. Eleanor dropped her hand but clutched my gift box tighter to her chest. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "You just could not help yourself, could you? You had to show up here looking like a militant. I told you to wear pastel. I told you to straighten your hair. But no, you always have to be so difficult. You always have to remind everyone how dark and hard you are." Chloe stepped up right beside our mother, nodding in agreement. Her custom wedding gown rustled against the dirty linoleum floor of the hallway, but she was too busy enjoying my scolding to care. "You are just jealous," Maya, Chloe chimed in, crossing her arms. "You are jealous because I secured a man with real pedigree. Preston comes from generational wealth. He is a Sterling. His family practically built the Gold Coast. Men like him do not look twice at loud, overly independent black women like you. You terrify men. That is why you are 32 and alone while I am marrying into a dynasty." The sheer delusion radiating from both of them was staggering. I stared at the two women who shared my blood, but had never acted like my family. The colorism that had poisoned our household since I was a little girl was laid bare right next to the kitchen garbage. I was the dark-skinned daughter with tight coils, the one who was too black, too aggressive, too smart for her own good. Chloe was the light-skinned prize, the one our mother had groomed for high society, the one whose mediocrity was constantly rewarded simply because she had a softer aesthetic that made white people feel comfortable. "You really think this is about jealousy?" I asked, taking a step toward them. "Do you really think I envy a woman who has to bleach her skin and suppress her own personality just to keep a man interested?" Eleanor gasped, taking a step back as if I had struck her. "How dare you speak to your sister that way on her wedding day? You are bitter because you know you will never have what she has. Preston is elevating this entire family. We are finally entering the upper echelon of Chicago society, and I will not let your aggressive attitude drag us back to the South Side. You have always been a burden, Maya. Always too much work. Why could you not just be soft and compliant like Chloe?" "Because being compliant gets you a seat next to the trash," I replied, gesturing to the folding table they had assigned me. "And being soft just makes you an easy target." I reached out and firmly grasped the silver gift box Eleanor was still clutching against her chest. She tried to hold on to it, her knuckles turning white, but I did not break eye contact. I applied just enough pressure to let her know she was completely powerless against me. She released the box with a huff of indignation, smoothing her dress as if I had contaminated her. "You want to know why I came today?" I said, holding the box effortlessly in one hand. "I did not come to eat your catered food. I did not come to mingle with a bunch of racist snobs who look at our family like we are the hired help. And I certainly did not come to watch you bow down to a family that thinks they own you. I came to drop off my gift." I untied the silk ribbon with one swift pull. Chloe leaned forward slightly, her greed overriding her disdain. She probably expected the keys to a luxury car or a massive check, considering she knew I made good money, even if she refused to understand exactly what I did in private equity. I opened the silver box. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a sleek matte black envelope. I lifted the envelope out and held it between my fingers. Then, without breaking eye contact with my sister, I turned and dropped the empty silver box directly into the large plastic trash can beside us. The hollow thud echoed loudly in the service hallway. "What are you doing?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill. "Give me my envelope." I looked at the black envelope in my hand. Then I looked at the trash can lid. I placed the envelope gently on top of the garbage lid, right next to a discarded piece of rotten fruit. "There is your gift," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am placing it exactly where you decided I belong." Eleanor lunged forward, her face contorted with rage. "You insolent, ungrateful girl! Pick that up right now and hand it to your sister properly." I did not flinch. I did not move. I just looked at the woman who had spent 32 years breaking my spirit, and I felt nothing but absolute freezing clarity. "You wanted me out of the way, Mother," I said. "You got your wish. Enjoy your new high society family. Enjoy the sterling wealth. And Chloe." I turned my gaze to my sister, who was staring at the black envelope on the trash can lid, with a mixture of confusion and fury. "Enjoy the wedding you truly deserve. You earned every single piece of it." I did not wait for their response. I turned on my heel and walked down the hallway, the sound of my stilettos echoing against the floor. I pushed open the heavy exit doors and stepped out into the crisp Chicago evening air. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. The little girl who used to beg for her mother's affection was dead. The woman who walked out of the Belmont estate was an apex predator who had just set a very precise, very lethal trap. As I walked down the sweeping stone staircase toward the circular driveway, I saw my chauffeured Maybach pulling up to the curb. The driver stepped out quickly, opening the rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather seat, the quiet hum of the engine shutting out the noise of the wedding behind me. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed my executive assistant. She answered on the first ring. "It is time," I said, leaning back against the headrest and watching the grand facade of the Belmont estate through the tinted window. "Execute the protocol. Freeze every single credit line associated with Preston Sterling and his entire family. Cancel the corporate cards. Flag the accounts for fraudulent activity. And call the estate venue manager directly. Tell them the primary funding source for tonight has been revoked. They are to halt the catering service immediately." "Understood," my assistant replied crisply. "Consider it done." I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the empty seat beside me. Inside that ballroom, my family was busy kissing the ring of a dynasty that did not actually exist. They had mocked my dark skin, belittled my independence, and shoved me by the garbage to appease a white man they thought was a billionaire. They had no idea that the money funding their lavish fairy tale was completely fake, or that the person holding the strings to their entire future was the very daughter they had just thrown away. The music was about to stop, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the silence. I leaned forward and tapped the glass partitions separating me from my driver. "Pull around to the south gardens and park near the conservatory windows," I instructed. "I want a clear view of the ballroom." The heavy vehicle glided silently along the manicured gravel path. As we parked in the shadows of the ancient oak trees, I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. Being the secret owner of the Belmont estate came with a myriad of perks, but having full access to the high-definition security feeds was currently my favorite. I tapped the screen and opened the live feed for the grand ballroom. Through the glowing screen, I watched my family celebrating their ultimate victory. Chloe was twirling in the center of the dance floor, her custom silk gown catching the light of 100 crystal chandeliers. Preston stood nearby, holding a glass of vintage champagne, soaking in the admiration of my parents' church congregation. Pastor Thomas and First Lady Eleanor were working the room, shaking hands with black politicians and business owners, practically bursting with pride. They thought they had finally arrived. They thought they had successfully married into a Chicago dynasty that would wash away their South Side origins and elevate them to the untouchable ranks of high society. They were so blinded by Preston's blonde hair, blue eyes, and country club vocabulary that they completely ignored the gaping holes in his financial background. White privilege is a hell of a drug, but it is an even better smokescreen. My phone vibrated with an incoming call from my assistant Sarah. "The accounts are locked, Maya," Sarah said, her voice completely devoid of hesitation. "Preston Sterling's primary black card has been declined by the processing merchant. I have also flagged the secondary corporate accounts associated with his tech startup. Our fraud division just initiated the freeze. He currently has less than $50 available in liquid assets." "Perfect," I replied, my eyes fixed on the iPad screen. "What about the venue manager?" "Mr. Vance is standing by," Sarah confirmed. "He received the alert that the $150,000 catering and venue charge failed to clear. He is waiting for your final authorization to confront the groom. Give him the green light," I commanded. "Tell Mr. Vance to cut the music and stop the food service immediately. I want this done publicly." I ended the call and adjusted my grip on the tablet. A cold electric anticipation coursed through my veins. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat. I was the dark-skinned, outspoken daughter who was constantly told to shrink herself. My mother had scrutinized my natural hair, criticized my ambitious nature, and constantly reminded me that I lacked the soft, palatable demeanor required to attract a successful man. Meanwhile, Chloe was allowed to be mediocre because she had a lighter complexion and a desperate willingness to assimilate into whatever shape a wealthy man desired. My parents had mortgaged their morals and their dignity to secure Preston. They had drained my college fund years ago just to buy Chloe a luxury car, to keep up appearances, forcing me to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs. They had constantly demanded that I sacrifice my own stability to fund Chloe's extravagant lifestyle, and now they were literally hiding me next to the kitchen garbage so I would not offend the very man who was actively scamming them. Preston Sterling was not old money. He was an absolute fraud. 3 weeks ago, my private equity firm had been brought in to audit Preston's technology startup for a potential buyout. What I found in those financial ledgers was nothing short of criminal. Preston had burned through his initial venture capital funding years ago. To keep up the facade of a wealthy aristocrat, he had been illegally embezzling millions of dollars from his investors. I used stolen corporate funds to lease his luxury cars, pay for his high-rise penthouse, and put the deposit down on Chloe's massive diamond engagement ring. I was a parasite wearing a tailored tuxedo, and my parents, in their desperate thirst for white validation and social status, had served my sister up to him on a silver platter. On my iPad screen, the scene inside the grand ballroom was about to fracture. I zoomed in on the head table. Waiters dressed in immaculate white jackets were just beginning to bring out the first course, carrying silver trays loaded with filet mignon and truffle asparagus. The string quartet in the corner of the room was playing a lively classical piece, creating a flawless atmosphere of generational wealth and sophistication. Suddenly, I watched as the head maitre d' raised his hand. It was a subtle gesture, but the waitstaff instantly froze. Like a perfectly choreographed military retreat, the waiters spun around and carried the trays of expensive food straight back through the swinging kitchen doors. At the same time, the venue manager raised his radio to his mouth. A second later, the lively classical music screeched to an abrupt, discordant halt. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the massive room. Guests began to look around in confusion, their conversations dying out as the luxurious atmosphere shattered into pieces. The venue manager, a stern man with decades of experience, handling the Chicago elite, marched purposefully across the ballroom floor. He did not go to the discreet side entrance or wait for a quiet moment. He walked straight toward the center of the room, heading directly for the VIP table where Preston, Chloe, and my parents were seated. I watched Preston's face on the high-definition feed. He was mid-laugh, raising his champagne glass to toast one of my father's wealthy church deacons. But as he saw the venue manager approaching with a dark, unyielding expression, Preston's smile faltered. The easy, arrogant confidence drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, sharp flash of panic. He knew he was living on borrowed time and stolen money, and the clock had just run out. I leaned back against the plush leather seat of the Maybach, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. The systemic disrespect, the colorism, the financial abuse, and the years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family were all about to collide with reality. I took a deep breath of the quiet air inside the car, watching the screen intently. The explosion was finally here. Through the glowing screen of my iPad, I watched the exact second my command took effect. Inside the grand ballroom, the string quartet was midway through a soaring rendition of a classical waltz. The cellist suddenly stopped his bow, hovering in midair as the lead violinist caught the sharp, decisive hand gesture from Mr. Vance, the estate venue manager. The music died with an ugly, discordant screech that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. A ripple of confusion washed over the 300 guests. At the head table, Chloe was just reaching for her crystal champagne flute, her face glowing with manufactured triumph. Waiters in immaculate white coats had fanned out across the room carrying heavy silver trays loaded with truffled asparagus and perfectly seared filet mignon. They were seconds away from placing the expensive plates before the hungry guests. Then, as if controlled by a single invisible string, every waiter stopped. They pivoted on their heels and marched uniformly back toward the swinging kitchen doors, taking the food with them. A collective gasp swept through the room. Church elders craned their necks. Wealthy socialites whispered behind manicured hands. The golden illusion of my sister's perfect day was cracking wide open. I zoomed the camera feed in on the VIP table. Preston Sterling sat between his parents, his arrogant smirk faltering as the room plunged into an awkward, suffocating silence. Mr. Vance did not send a junior staff member to handle this situation. He did not pull the wedding planner aside for a discreet conversation in the hallway. He marched straight across the polished marble floor, his posture rigid and his expression carved from stone. He bypassed the terrified bridesmaids and walked directly up to Preston. The acoustics in the ballroom were phenomenal. With the music gone and the guests holding their breath, Mr. Vance's voice carried with devastating clarity. I turned the volume up on my device, not wanting to miss a single syllable. Mr. Sterling. Mr. Vance said, his tone devoid of any customer service warmth. We have a serious problem. Preston scoffed, adjusting his tailored tuxedo jacket. He tried to project the casual annoyance of a billionaire inconvenienced by the help. Vance, what is the meaning of this? Why is the food being taken away? My guests are waiting. Turn the music back on immediately. I am afraid I cannot do that, sir, Mr. Vance replied, his voice ringing out like a gavel striking wood. The payment method you provided on file has been rejected. Your black card was just declined for the outstanding balance of $150,000. The word declined hit the room like a physical shockwave. My mother Eleanor gripped the edge of the table, her jaw dropping open. Chloe went completely rigid, her eyes darting frantically between Preston and the venue manager. That is impossible! Preston snapped, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. Do you know who I am? Run it again. It is obviously a system error on your end. I am a Sterling. Our accounts do not decline. Mr. Vance did not flinch at the aggressive display of white privilege. We have run it 3 times, Mr. Sterling. We also attempted to process the secondary corporate cards you provided from your technology firm. Every single account has been flagged and frozen. You currently have 0 available funds to cover this event. Preston's father stood up, knocking his chair back loudly. He pointed a trembling finger at the manager, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. Listen here, you incompetent fool. You are ruining my son's wedding. We are one of the most prominent families in Chicago. You will serve that food right now, or I will personally see to it that you never work in hospitality again. I will sue this estate into the ground. Preston's mother, a woman who had spent the entire evening looking down her nose at my relatives, chimed in with her shrill voice. This is targeted harassment. You people are trying to extort us. I smiled in the back of my Maybach. The Sterling family was so used to bullying their way through life, assuming their skin color and stolen prestige would bend reality to their will. But money is the only language that matters in private equity, and they had none left. Mr. Vance crossed his arms, staring the older man down with absolute contempt. You are welcome to try, sir. But as of this moment, you are trespassing on private property. Our contract explicitly states that the final balance must be cleared before the dinner service begins. Since your funds are non-existent, this event is officially cancelled. Chloe grabbed Preston's arm, her voice rising in a shrill panic. Preston, what is he talking about? Just give him another card. Fix this. Everyone is staring at us. Preston was sweating now. The arrogant facade was melting rapidly, exposing the terrified con artist underneath. He frantically pulled his phone from his pocket, tapping the screen with shaking fingers, desperately trying to log into his banking apps. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Locked screens, fraud alerts, zero balances. I had stripped him of every stolen dime. There must be a mistake with the bank, Preston stammered, avoiding Chloe's panicked gaze. Just give me an hour to call my wealth manager. You do not have an hour, Mr. Vance fired back. You have exactly 5 minutes to provide a valid, verifiable form of payment for the $150,000 you owe us. If a working card is not in my hand by then, I will instruct my security team to clear this ballroom. And then, Mr. Sterling, I will call the Chicago Police Department and have you arrested for theft of services. The threat of police intervention sent a shockwave of sheer terror through the VIP table. My parents, who had spent their entire lives obsessing over respectability politics, looked like they were going to faint. To have the police called to their daughter's wedding was the ultimate nightmare. In the Black church community, public embarrassment of the pastor and first lady was a scandal that would outlive them. Their desperate climb up the social ladder was ending in a humiliating public freefall. Eleanor grabbed my father's sleeve, her voice trembling. Thomas, do something. The congregation is watching. Do not let them call the police on Preston. This will ruin us. The church elders were whispering furiously. Guests were pulling out their phones, recording the spectacle. Chloe's dream of marrying into white wealth and laughing at my expense had turned into a spectacular, inescapable trap. The trap I had set. The music had stopped, the food was gone, and the real show was just beginning. The tension in the ballroom thickened into something you could cut with a knife. Through my glowing iPad screen, I watched Preston's mother, Victoria Sterling, slowly rise from her elegant chair. She adjusted her diamond necklace, her pale face pulled into a tight, disgusted grimace as she looked directly at my parents. She did not raise her voice, but her sharp, clipped tone carried perfectly through the silent room. Preston, darling, I warned you about rushing into things with these people, Victoria said, emphasizing the last 2 words like they were a disease. I knew this entire production felt a bit too ostentatious. It is always the ones with no real background who try the hardest to perform wealth. Are we sure this is not some sort of elaborate scheme to trap you into footing the bill for their ghetto fabulous family reunion? I told you, Preston, you cannot trust people who scramble from the bottom. They are always looking for a handout. My mother, Eleanor, flinched as if she had been violently slapped across the face. For her entire life, she had built her identity around strict respectability politics. She served on high-profile church committees, wore tailored designer suits, and brutally policed my tone, just to avoid ever being associated with the word ghetto. Yet here she was standing in front of her entire congregation, being openly degraded by the white woman she had spent a year trying to impress. Preston's father chimed in, crossing his arms and glaring fiercely at Pastor Thomas. I refuse to let my son be shaken down by grifters. You people clearly cannot afford the lifestyle you are pretending to live. Fix this immediately, Thomas, or we are walking out of here and taking our son with us. Did my father defend his wife? Did he defend his family's honor against the blatant racist disrespect? Absolutely not. Pastor Thomas, a man who preached about dignity, pride, and standing tall every Sunday morning, completely crumbled. He swallowed his pride and immediately scrambled to find a convenient scapegoat to offer up to the Sterlings. And in our family, the scapegoat was always me. This is not our doing. Richard, I assure you, my father stammered. Actually, bowing his head submissively to Preston's father. It is my eldest daughter, Maya. She works in high finance and she has always been deeply disturbed. She is incredibly jealous of Chloe's lighter complexion and her ability to attract a man of your incredible stature. She must have hacked the vendor accounts to sabotage this beautiful union. She knows how to manipulate digital funds. Chloe grabbed onto that lie like a lifeline, fresh tears ruining her perfect expensive makeup. She did, Chloe wailed, clinging tightly to Preston's arm. Maya hates that I found a good man. She has been trying to ruin my life since we were teenagers, just because she cannot get a ring of her own. My father slammed his heavy fist on the table, his booming pastor voice taking over the room to ensure the church elders heard his righteous indignation. That ungrateful girl has always been a massive thorn in my side. She has held a grudge against us ever since college. Just because I had to reallocate her tuition savings to buy Chloe a reliable vehicle for her internships, Maya has acted like we committed a federal crime. She is my daughter, my property. I had every right to move that money. Chloe needed a luxury car to secure her future, and Maya was perfectly capable of taking out student loans. I gave her life, and this is how she repays me. By humiliating us in front of the Sterling family. I sat in the back of the Maybach, my jaw clenched tight. Hearing him admit it out loud in front of hundreds of people felt like a physical blow. He had just proudly confessed to severe financial abuse. He had stolen $40,000 from my college fund money I had earned through academic scholarships and grueling part-time jobs, and handed it to Chloe so she could drive a brand new Mercedes to her useless communications internship. I spent the next 10 years drowning in student debt, eating instant noodles and working myself to the bone, all while my family praised Chloe for looking naturally successful. I do not care about your pathetic family drama, Thomas Preston's father barked, checking his heavy gold Rolex. The venue manager said we have 5 minutes before the police arrive. You are the bride's family. You pay the bill right now or this wedding is over. Mr. Vance stood nearby, arms folded firmly behind his back, flanked by 2 massive security guards. He was not bluffing. The clock was ticking. My parents looked at each other in sheer, unadulterated panic. They did not have $150,000 in liquid cash. They had completely drained their church emergency fund just to pay for Chloe's custom designer dress and the extravagant floral arrangements. They were dead broke, trying to play a high-stakes game of Monopoly with empty pockets. Eleanor's hands visibly shook as she dug into her heavily beaded clutch. She pulled out her phone, her manicured fingers slipping on the glass screen. She was out of options, out of wealthy white saviors, and out of time. There was only one person left in the entire world who had the capital to bail them out of a 6-figure catastrophe. The daughter she had just banished to the hallway trash cans. My personal cell phone began to ring, vibrating against the smooth leather seat of the car. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the absolute desperation radiating from the screen. On the 4th ring, I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear. Maya Eleanor hissed into the receiver, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper. She was desperately trying to hide her panic from the guests staring at her. Maya, where are you? Something terrible has happened with Preston's bank. You need to wire $150,000 to the Belmont estate immediately. Do not argue with me. Just transfer the funds from your corporate account. You have millions sitting in your private equity fund. Stop being selfish for 5 minutes and save your sister's wedding. If you do not wire the money right now, the police are going to drag Preston out of here in handcuffs. Do you want your sister to be a laughingstock? Do you want our congregation to see us fail? I am your mother, and I am commanding you to authorize the transfer. I listened to her rapid, demanding breaths over the line. Even now, facing total public destruction and police intervention, she could not muster a single drop of respect. She demanded my money while offering absolutely nothing in return. I looked at the iPad screen, watching her pace nervously by the VIP table, holding her phone tightly to her ear. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air of the car center me. My voice was smooth, steady, and entirely devoid of mercy. Did you open the envelope I left on the trash can yet? The line went completely dead silent for 3 full seconds. I could hear the chaotic murmur of the panicked wedding guests, bleeding through the phone speaker, accompanied by the heavy, ragged breathing of my mother. She was standing in the middle of a collapsing fairy tale, surrounded by unpaid venue managers and hostile white in-laws. Yet my simple question about a trash can paralyzed her. What are you talking about? Eleanor hissed, her voice cracking under the sheer weight of her desperation. Maya, stop playing your petty games. The police are on their way. Preston is about to be arrested. I need you to wire the money right now. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone as smooth and cold as polished marble. I told you, Mother. Go to the service hallway. Look on top of the garbage lid where you and your golden child decided I belonged. Open the black envelope. I tapped the screen of my iPad, switching the camera feed from the main ballroom to the service hallway. Through the phone, I heard Eleanor screaming at Chloe. I watched on the live feed as the heavy wooden kitchen doors burst open. Chloe came sprinting into the sterile fluorescent-lit hallway. Her custom beaded gown, the one my parents had drained their church emergency fund to purchase, dragged across the wet linoleum floor, soaking up dirty dishwater and grime. She looked frantic, her expensive bridal updo unraveling, her chest heaving as she frantically scanned the area. There it was, sitting perfectly undisturbed on the lid of the plastic trash bin, right next to a discarded bruised apple. The sleek matte black envelope. Chloe lunged for it. She ripped the flap open with her acrylic nails, tearing the thick paper in her haste. She pulled out a stack of heavy watermarked legal documents fastened with a gold seal. I zoomed the camera in on her face. I wanted to see the exact moment her delusion shattered. Chloe stared at the top page. Her eyes darted back and forth across the legal jargon. She read the bold, capitalized letters at the top. Master deed of ownership and transfer of real property. She scanned down to the property description, which clearly listed the historic Belmont estate and all its surrounding acreage. Then her eyes hit the buyer information. Acquired in full by MA Holdings Private Equity. I listened over the open phone line as Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Mom!" Chloe shrieked, sprinting back toward the ballroom doors, clutching the deed to her chest like a shield. "Mom, look at this." I switched my iPad feed back to the grand ballroom. Chloe burst through the doors and ran straight to the VIP table. She slammed the heavy legal documents down right in front of Eleanor Preston and his horrified parents. Eleanor grabbed the paperwork, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the pages steady. "M.A. Holdings." Eleanor read aloud, her voice trembling. "What does this mean? Who is M.A. Holdings?" Preston snatched the paper from her. He was sweating profusely, his arrogant posture completely gone. He read the acquisition details and then looked up, his face drained of all color. "M.A. stands for Maya Preston," whispered the realization hitting him like a freight train. "Your sister owns this company." "That is impossible," Eleanor shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "She is just a financial advisor. She does not have the capital to buy a historic estate. This is a fake. She printed this off the internet to humiliate us." I sat back in the leather seat of my Maybach and smiled. They were always so committed to underestimating me. They could never fathom that the dark-skinned daughter they constantly pushed to the shadows had quietly built an empire while they were busy playing dress-up for the church congregation. 3 months ago, the Belmont estate was bleeding cash. The previous owners had mismanaged the property into the ground and were facing imminent foreclosure. My firm swooped in and acquired the entire estate, its debts, and its staff for a fraction of its market value. We had been quietly restructuring the management behind the scenes. I literally owned the ground they were standing on. I owned the chandeliers hanging above their heads. I owned the plates they were eating off of. I pressed the unmute button on my phone. "The deed is completely real, Mother," I said, my voice echoing through her phone speaker. "I bought the Belmont estate 3 months ago, which means you are currently throwing a fraudulent wedding on my private property." Eleanor gasped loudly. Through the camera feed, I watched her legs give out slightly, forcing her to lean heavily against the table. "You own the estate," she whispered, the horrifying reality finally sinking in. "You own all of this. And you just insulted the owner," snatched her gift out of her hands and told her to sit by the garbage, I reminded her. "You told me I did not fit the aesthetic of your high society event. Well, it turns out your high society event does not fit the financial requirements of my venue." Preston's father, who had been listening to the revelation, turned purple with rage. He slammed his fist down, knocking over a crystal champagne flute. "This is an outrage. I do not care who owns this building. We are the Sterling family. You will honor our reservation, and you will serve our guests immediately, or my lawyers will destroy your little private equity firm by morning." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It echoed coldly over the phone line. "Oh, Mr. Sterling," I said, You do not have any lawyers left, and you certainly do not have a hedge fund. You do not even have enough liquid cash to buy a fast food burger right now, let alone sue a multi-million-dollar firm. What are you talking about? Preston's mother shrieked, clutching her pearls. How dare you speak to us like that? We have generational wealth. You have generational debt, I corrected her sharply. I told you I run a private equity firm. We specialize in hostile takeovers and financial audits. Did Preston conveniently forget to tell you that my team audited his tech startup 3 weeks ago? Did he forget to mention the massive glaring holes in his corporate ledgers? On the screen, Preston physically recoiled. He stumbled backward, knocking his own chair over. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the trapdoor to open. Chloe grabbed Preston's arm, shaking him violently. Preston, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell them you are a billionaire. Preston could not speak. He just stared at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. Allow me to clarify, I said, making sure my voice was loud enough for the venue manager, the security guards, and the eavesdropping guests to hear. Your precious golden boy is completely broke. The Sterling family fortune dried up over a decade ago. Preston has been running a Ponzi scheme. He embezzled $2 million from his investors just to lease his luxury cars, pay for his penthouse, and buy that fake diamond ring on your finger, Chloe. He is a fraud, and he used your desperation for white validation to secure a compliant, wealthy family to drain. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the breathing of the guests seemed to stop. Chloe looked down at the massive, glittering ring on her finger, then up at the man she was about to vow her life to. The golden child had been completely played. Her entire identity built on the premise of marrying better and lighter than me was a hollow, worthless lie. And as for the venue bill, I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. I am not paying it. You wanted a luxury wedding, you figure out how to pay the luxury price tag. I hung up the phone. I did not need to hear their excuses. I did not need to hear their apologies or their desperate pleading. I sat in the luxurious quiet of my car, watching the chaos unfold on my screen as the truth tore through their perfect facade like a hurricane. The guests were murmuring, pointing fingers, and pulling out their phones to text everyone they knew. The elite church congregation was witnessing the total destruction of Pastor Thomas and First Lady Eleanor's reputation. And the best part was that I had barely even started. I watched the screen as Preston snatched the thick legal documents right out of my mother's trembling hands. The aristocratic mask he had worn for the past year completely melted away. His face turned a splotchy, angry red, and the veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. He frantically flipped through the pages of the master deed, his eyes scanning the embossed seals and the notarized signatures. He threw the heavy stack of papers onto the floor and pointed a trembling finger at the camera dome mounted on the ceiling, knowing I was watching. There is no way! Preston screamed, his voice cracking with a high-pitched hysteria that echoed across the silent ballroom. This is a complete fabrication. A black woman from the south side of Chicago does not just buy a $50 million historic property. It is impossible. You people are nothing but ghetto upstarts trying to steal from a real family. She is a diversity hire who probably committed fraud to get her name on that paper. A collective gasp ripped through the room. The black elite of Chicago, the deacons, the choir members, the local politicians all sat frozen in their gilded chairs. They had just heard the golden boy, the supposed savior of our family lineage, drop his polite facade and reveal the virulent racism underneath. He had just called the entire congregation "you people." Any decent father would have stepped forward and defended his blood. Any respectable man of God would have thrown Preston out by his expensive lapels for speaking about his daughter that way. But Pastor Thomas did not defend me. He did not defend our community. Instead, my father stepped in front of Preston, holding his hands up in a placating, submissive gesture. Please, Preston, my father begged, his voice dripping with absolute cowardice. Please calm down, son. Do not let her aggressive behavior upset you. You know how Maya is. She has always been too loud, too militant. We are so sorry for this disruption. We will handle her. Just please do not let this ruin the alliance between our families. I sat in the back of my Maybach, feeling a wave of absolute disgust wash over me. My father was bowing to a broke white con artist. He was actively throwing his dark-skinned daughter under the bus. validating the racist insults of a man who was actively scamming our family out of their life savings. Eleanor rushed forward, grabbing Preston's arm and patting it soothingly. She turned her back on the furious whispers of her own church members and focused entirely on the white gaze. "Preston is right, Thomas," she hissed desperately, trying to maintain the illusion of their high society arrangement. Maya has always been jealous of Chloe's lighter features and her refined grace. Maya has that militant, angry black woman complex. She probably forged these documents just to sabotage Chloe's chance at real generational wealth because she knows no respectable white man would ever claim a woman who looks like her. I stared at the iPad screen, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. The level of selfhood radiating from my parents was staggering. They were so desperate to escape their own blackness, so desperate to be accepted by the very people who despised them, that they were willing to agree with a racist tirade against their own flesh and blood. They were literally apologizing to the man who had stolen millions of dollars from innocent investors and was currently bankrupting their church. Chloe stood frozen in her massive wedding dress, staring at Preston. Her dream was collapsing, but she was too conditioned by our parents' respectability politics to speak up. Preston pushed Eleanor away roughly, completely disregarding his charming son-in-law persona. "Do not touch me," Preston snarled at my mother. "Your entire family is a joke. I brought you into my world, and you let that aggressive ghetto sister of yours ruin my wedding. I am going to have my father's lawyers destroy her firm. She will be answering phones in a call center by the time we are done with her." Preston's mother, Victoria, stepped forward, adjusting her silk shawl with trembling hands. "I told you, Preston," she sneered, looking at my parents with unhidden disgust. "I told you what happens when you mingle with these people. They drag you down to their level. This entire wedding is a sham. We are leaving right now." "Wait, please," Victoria, Eleanor pleaded, actually reaching out to grab the white woman's sleeve. "We can fix this. We have the church emergency fund. We can pull the money and pay the venue. Thomas, call the bank right now. We will clear the balance. Just do not call off the wedding. Chloe loves him." My parents were willing to commit financial suicide right there on the dance floor. They were willing to drain the remaining donations of hard-working parishioners just to appease a racist family that was actively insulting them to their faces. They prioritized the white gaze over their own dignity, over their own daughter's humanity, over the very congregation they led every Sunday. Every time I achieved something in my life, my parents attributed it to luck or affirmative action. Every time Chloe failed, they blamed the world for not recognizing her delicate beauty. Hearing them validate Preston's slurs confirmed what I had known since childhood. I was never a daughter to them. I was a scapegoat born to absorb their insecurities, while they projected all their social climbing fantasies onto Chloe. The venue manager, Mr. Vance, stepped forward, signaling for his security team to advance on the VIP table. "Mr. Sterling, you are officially out of time," Vance declared loudly. "Your threats mean nothing on my property. You have failed to produce valid payment and your behavior is completely unacceptable. Security will now escort your party off the premises." Preston panicked, his eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. He knew that if he was thrown out, the facade was over. His creditors would know he was broke. The venture capitalists he had defrauded would see the viral videos of his humiliating eviction. He grabbed Chloe by the shoulders, shaking her slightly. "Tell your parents to pay the bill right now," Preston demanded, his voice laced with pure desperation. "Tell them to empty their accounts. Do it, Chloe, or we are finished." Chloe looked at the man she worshipped. The illusion of his wealth was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of his financial ruin. But she was too weak to break the cycle. She turned to our father, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please," Chloe sobbed. "Do what Preston says. Pay the manager. Do not let Maya win." I turned off the iPad screen and handed it to my driver, who was standing outside my open car door. The time for watching was over. The time for executing the final blow had arrived. I stepped out of the Maybach, my emerald gown catching the evening breeze. I signaled to the head of my private security detail, a towering man named Marcus, who had been waiting patiently by the fountain. "Clear the entrance," I commanded, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a woman who owned the ground she stood on. "We are going inside." The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crack. Marcus pushed them wide, his massive frame clearing the path as four more heavily armed security contractors filed in behind him. I stepped through the threshold, the emerald silk of my gown sweeping across the imported marble. The sheer presence of my arrival sent a shockwave through the room. 300 guests parted instantly, clearing a direct path to the head table. The whispers stopped. The muffled sobbing from my sister ceased. The entire congregation of my parents' church stared in absolute shock as the daughter they had just banished to the hallway trash cans returned with an army at her back. I did not rush. I took my time walking down the center aisle, my stilettos clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. Every step was a testament to the power I had quietly built, while they were busy praising my sister for her proximity to whiteness. When I finally reached the VIP table, I looked down at the people who had made my life a living nightmare. Chloe was clutching her heavy silk skirts, her face streaked with ruined mascara. Eleanor looked as though all the air had been sucked out of her lungs, her hands trembling violently in her lap. My father, the supposedly fearless leader of his congregation, could not even meet my eyes. "Mr. Vance," I called out, not shifting my gaze from my family. The venue manager stepped forward immediately, his posture completely deferential. "Yes, ma'am. I want the kitchens cleared," I commanded, my voice projecting effortlessly across the silent ballroom. "Hey, every single plate of filet mignon, the caviar, the roasted asparagus, and the custom wedding cake. Have the catering staff pack everything into thermal transport containers immediately. You are going to load it all into the estate delivery vans and drive it directly to the Southside Community Shelter. The people in my old neighborhood will not go hungry tonight, while a table full of frauds tries to feast on my dime. Make sure it gets there hot." Mr. Vance nodded sharply. "Right away, ma'am." He gestured to his staff, and within seconds the remaining waiters began hauling the extravagant floral centerpieces and silver platters out of the room. Chloe let out a strangled gasp, reaching out as if she could physically stop the waiters from dismantling her fairy tale. "Maya, please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this. This is my wedding day. I am your sister." "You stopped being my sister the moment you decided my skin tone and my independence were too embarrassing for your racist in-laws," I replied coldly. "You wanted a high society aesthetic, Chloe. You wanted to erase where we came from so you could play the role of the submissive, acceptable black wife to a wealthy white man. You sold your own soul for this dinner, and I am not paying the tab." I turned my attention to Preston and his parents. They were standing defensively behind their chairs, their faces pale and rigid with fury. "As for you," I said, looking Preston directly in the eye, "your fraudulent reservation is permanently cancelled. You have exactly 3 minutes to gather whatever dignity you have left and vacate my property. If you or your parents are still standing in this ballroom when the clock runs out, Marcus and his team will physically drag you out to the curb for trespassing." Preston's father, William Sterling, erupted. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson, the veins in his forehead pulsing against his skin. He shoved his chair aside and stomped toward me, completely ignoring the fact that Marcus immediately stepped forward to block his path. William pointed a shaking finger right at my face, leaning into the protective wall of his white privilege. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch!" William snarled, his voice echoing with absolute venom. "You think because you somehow managed to swindle the deed to one bankrupt building that you can speak to us this way. You have no idea who you are dealing with. We are the Sterling family. We have generational power in this city. You are nothing but an uneducated ghetto upstart playing dress-up in a world you do not understand." I did not flinch. I let him yell, watching his desperation manifest as raw, unfiltered hatred. "I will not be humiliated by someone like you." William continued, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "We manage a massive hedge fund with billions in assets. I have the most ruthless corporate lawyers in Chicago on retainer. I will unleash my entire legal team on your pathetic little private equity firm by tomorrow morning. We will bury you in litigation. We will sue you for breach of contract, seize this estate, and leave you begging on the streets. You will be bankrupt and answering phones in a call center by the time I am done destroying your life." His wife Victoria chimed in, clutching her expensive pearls and glaring at me with pure disgust. "You are going to regret the day you crossed us," she hissed. "We will make sure you are ruined." The church elders in the audience gasped at the ferocity of the threat. My mother let out a loud sob, burying her face in her hands, completely convinced that the powerful white family was about to obliterate her only successful daughter. My father finally stood up, rushing forward to try and intervene, begging William to show mercy, still pathetically attempting to save face with the very people threatening his child. But I just stood there, perfectly still, letting the echoes of their massive hedge fund threat fade into the vaulted ceiling. I looked at William Sterling's red, furious face, and a slow predator's smile spread across my lips. I reached into my emerald gown, pulled out a thick sealed audit file, and prepared to drop the final devastating anvil on their fake empire. The sound of my laughter caught William Sterling completely off guard. It was not a nervous chuckle or a polite giggle, but a deep, resonant laugh that bounced off the crystal chandeliers and filled the grand ballroom. His face shifted from furious red to a confused, blotchy pink. He opened his mouth to hurl another insult, but I did not give him the chance. I lifted my arm and slammed the heavy sealed folder directly onto the center of the VIP table. The loud smack of thick paper hitting the polished wood made my mother jump out of her seat. "What is this garbage?" William demanded, staring at the manila envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He refused to touch it, but his eyes darted nervously toward his son. Preston was staring at the folder with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "That garbage is a forensic financial audit," I stated clearly, making sure every guest in the room could hear me. "3 weeks ago, your brilliant son came to my firm begging for a corporate buyout. His technology startup was bleeding cash, and he needed a massive influx of capital to keep his doors open. He pitched his company to MA Holdings, completely unaware that the woman he was dodging at family dinners was the primary shareholder sitting on the other side of that corporate wall. I personally authorized the due diligence process. I put my best forensic accountants on his ledgers." Preston lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder off the table, but my security chief, Marcus, intercepted him smoothly. Marcus placed a massive hand flat against Preston's chest and shoved him back into his chair with effortless force. Preston collapsed into the seat, gasping for air, his tailored tuxedo jacket bunching up around his shoulders. "You have no right to look at those private financials," Preston stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "That is confidential corporate data. You stole it. You handed it to my acquisition team, voluntarily," I corrected him, leaning over the table to look him dead in the eye. "You were so desperate for a bailout that you signed over full access to your corporate accounts. And what we found in those accounts was absolutely fascinating." I turned my attention back to William and Victoria Sterling, who were now standing very close together, their arrogant posture beginning to crumble. "You talk a big game about your massive hedge fund, William," I said, my voice dripping with lethal precision. "You love throwing around phrases like generational wealth and old money to intimidate people who actually work for a living. But the truth is, your family has been dead broke for over a decade. The Sterling Family Trust was completely liquidated in the 2008 housing crash. You lost everything. The mansion you live in is heavily mortgaged, the country club memberships are unpaid, and your hedge fund is just a hollow shell corporation you use to secure high-interest loans. You are living on credit cards and fumes." Victoria gasped, pressing her hand to her throat. She looked around the room at the hundreds of black guests she had just insulted, realizing that they were now witnessing her absolute financial ruin. "Do not listen to her," Victoria shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is a liar. She is just an angry, jealous woman making up stories to ruin our reputation." I reached over and flicked the folder open, spreading the printed bank statements across the white tablecloth. "The numbers do not lie, Victoria, but your son certainly does. Preston did not just mismanage his technology company. He committed federal wire fraud. When the venture capital funding ran out, he started creating fake vendor invoices. He has systematically embezzled over $2 million from his own investors over the last 18 months. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic whispers. My parents' church congregation, the deacons, the choir members, the politicians, everyone was leaning forward, hanging on to my every word. The white savior my parents had sacrificed my dignity to secure was nothing but a common thief. Chloe grabbed Preston's arm, shaking him violently. "Preston, tell her she is lying," Chloe cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "Tell them about your trust fund. Tell them about the penthouse. Tell them how much you paid for my ring." I looked at my sister, feeling a fleeting second of pity, before the memory of the trash can erased it entirely. "The penthouse is leased under a fake corporate name, Chloe," I explained softly. "The luxury cars are rented, and that massive diamond ring on your finger was purchased using stolen investor funds. The jewelry store is already drafting the repossession paperwork. Your entire relationship is funded by a Ponzi scheme." Preston needed a wealthy, desperate family to marry into, so he could secure a new line of credit to pay off his furious investors. He found the perfect marks in our parents. They were so eager to buy their way into whiteness that they never bothered to run a simple background check. Preston buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He did not deny a single word. He could not. The paper trail I had dropped on the table was undeniable. William Sterling stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter holding an empty tray. The arrogant billionaire facade had completely evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified old man who knew he was about to lose everything. "You cannot do this to us," William pleaded, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. His earlier threats of ruthless corporate lawyers were completely forgotten. "We can make a deal. We can sign over the company shares. Just keep this quiet. Do not take this to the authorities. We can work out a payment plan." I laughed again, crossing my arms and standing tall in my emerald gown. "You do not have anything I want, William. And I am not a loan officer. I am the woman you just called a ghetto upstart. And unfortunately for you, the financial audit my team completed was automatically flagged for severe criminal irregularities. By law, my firm was required to report those irregularities to the proper authorities." My father, Pastor Thomas, finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. His eyes were wide with a terrifying realization. "Maya, what did you do?" my father demanded, his voice shaking with a sudden, intense panic. "Who exactly did you report this to?" Before I could answer him, a blinding flash of red and blue lights illuminated the massive stained glass windows of the grand ballroom. The piercing wail of police sirens tore through the night air, growing louder and more aggressive as multiple vehicles sped up the long, winding driveway of the Belmont estate. The flashing lights bounced off the crystal chandeliers, painting the terrified faces of the Sterling family in a harsh, relentless strobe. The authorities had arrived and my trap had officially snapped shut. Panic erupted as police sirens echoed down the long driveway. Church deacons scrambled past, bewildered socialites. But my father did not look at the white man who had just insulted our heritage and admitted to running a massive fraud scheme. Pastor Thomas turned his furious eyes solely on me, lunging forward to grab my bare arm with a desperate grip. "Stop this immediately," my father hissed, trying to avoid the ears of his congregation. "You call whoever you just called and tell them the audit was wrong. We are not having police drag my daughter's groom out in handcuffs." I looked at his sweating face. "Let go of me," I said calmly. "I cannot call off federal investigators. Preston committed wire fraud. He is a criminal." His grip tightened. "I do not care about his business mistakes," my father growled. "Businessmen make errors. You have the capital, Maya. You can buy his debt. Pay off the venue right now and make all of this go away. Write a check to his investors tomorrow and we will sweep this under the rug." I stared at the man who preached about integrity every Sunday. He was demanding I use my hard-earned fortune money I amassed while he starved my college fund to buy Chloe clothes to bail out a white con artist. "You want me to pay off a federal crime?" I asked loudly. "You want me to empty my accounts to save a man who just called your congregation ghetto upstarts? He despises everything you represent. Yet your instinct is to force your black daughter to shield him from his own theft." "Keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed, glancing nervously at the watching church elders. "Maya, listen to your father. The reputation of our church is at stake. Do you know what the community will say if Chloe marries a felon? The other pastors will laugh at us. You have to fix this. You can absorb this financial hit. We are ordering you to protect this family." I yanked my arm out of my father's grasp with such force that he stumbled forward. "Protect this family," I repeated, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping my lips. "When have you ever protected me?" "When I was 19 and working overnight shifts just to afford textbooks. One of your wealthy deacons cornered me in the church parking lot and put his hands on me. I came to you crying, terrified, and asking for help. And what did you do, Pastor Thomas? You told me to keep my mouth shut. You told me my skirt was probably too short, and that making an accusation would destroy the church board. You sacrificed my safety to protect your precious optics. My father flinched, the color draining from his face as the memory of his own cowardice was dragged into the light. Several church members standing nearby gasped, their hands flying to their mouths as my painful buried truth was finally spoken out loud. You have always demanded that black women suffer in silence so that weak men can maintain their power. I continued, stepping closer to my father, forcing him to retreat. You silence me. You police my skin tone. You tell me my natural hair is unprofessional. You say my ambition is aggressive. You force me to shrink so you can feel big. And now you are begging me to save a white man who treats you like garbage because you think his fake pedigree makes you look important. You would rather watch me go bankrupt than watch your golden child face reality. Chloe rushed over, her heavy beaded gown dragging behind her. She grabbed my arm, her face a mask of pure desperation. Maya, please, she sobbed, completely ignoring everything I had just said. If Preston goes to jail, I will be a laughingstock. I cannot be the girl whose husband was arrested at the altar. I will do anything. I will let you be the maid of honor. I will give you a seat at the head table. Just pay the bill. Just give them the money. I looked at my sister, marveling at the absolute depth of her delusion. She actually thought a seat at her fraudulent table was a fair trade for millions of dollars. She still viewed me as a subordinate, a stepping stone to be stepped on whenever she needed a boost. I do not want a seat at your table, Chloe, I said coldly. I own the table. I own the building it sits in, and I am officially evicting you from my property. My father raised his hand, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. You insolent, ungrateful girl, he bellowed, his pastoral voice vibrating with fury. If you do not pull out your checkbook and fix this, you are no longer a part of this family. I will disown you. I will excommunicate you from the church. You will be dead to us. I looked him dead in the eye, my posture perfectly straight, my spirit completely unbreakable. You cannot disown someone who already walked away, I said quietly. You are not a man of God. You are just a coward who worships white approval, and your God cannot save you from the federal government. As the words left my mouth, the deafening wail of police sirens pierced the thick, heavy doors of the grand ballroom. The sound was no longer approaching, it was right outside. The heavy oak doors rattled violently as loud, authoritative pounding echoed through the grand foyer. Red and blue lights flashed frantically through the massive stained glass windows, painting the terrified faces of my family in a harsh, relentless strobe. The authorities had breached the Belmont estate, and the reckoning had officially begun. The red and blue lights flashed frantically through the massive stained glass windows, painting the terrified faces of my family in a harsh, relentless strobe. The authorities had breached the Belmont estate, and the reckoning had officially begun. A dozen law enforcement officers flooded into the grand ballroom. They were a mix of Chicago Police Department officers in uniform and federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across the back in bold yellow letters. Their heavy boots thudded against the marble floor, completely drowning out the frantic whispers of the 300 guests. The atmosphere shifted from a high society celebration to a crime scene in a matter of seconds. Church deacons grabbed their wives and backed away toward the walls. The wealthy socialites who had been judging my family all night were now scrambling to avoid being associated with the incoming raid. At the front of the pack, a tall, stern-looking federal agent holding a thick folder marched directly toward the VIP table. He did not care about the extravagant floral arrangements or the custom silk tablecloths. He possessed the absolute authority of a man executing a federal warrant. Preston Sterling finally realized there was no charming his way out of this. His aristocratic mask completely shattered, revealing the desperate cornered animal underneath. He spun around, frantically searching for an exit, but my security chief, Marcus, stepped right into his path. Marcus crossed his massive arms and gave Preston a chilling smile, effectively boxing the groom in between my private security detail and the advancing federal agents. Preston Sterling, the lead agent, announced, his booming voice cutting through the chaotic murmurs of the ballroom. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Preston's father, William, lunged forward, his face purple with rage and panic. He positioned himself between his son and the federal agent, pointing a shaking finger. "You cannot do this," William bellowed, saliva flying from his lips. "We are the Sterling family. I am calling the police commissioner. I am calling the governor. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I will have your badge for this outrage." The federal agent did not even blink. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs, and looked William dead in the eye. "Step aside, sir, or I will arrest you right now for obstruction of justice. And for the record, our Economic Crimes Division is currently executing a simultaneous search warrant on your home and your supposed hedge fund offices. You might want to save your phone call for a criminal defense attorney." William's jaw dropped open. His blustering confidence evaporated instantly. He stumbled backward, colliding with his wife Victoria, who let out a sharp, terrified shriek. They had spent the entire evening insulting my family, calling us ghetto upstarts and acting like royalty. Now they were cowering like common criminals. Two officers grabbed Preston by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him face first onto the VIP table. The impact rattled the crystal champagne flutes and sent silverware clattering to the floor. The harsh metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around Preston's wrists echoed through the room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a beautiful, undeniable confirmation that the lies were finally over. "No!" Chloe screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and agonizing. She threw herself forward, her custom-beaded wedding gown tangling around her legs as she scrambled toward the table. "Preston, tell them it is a mistake. Tell them who you are." Preston did not look at her. He kept his face pressed against the white tablecloth, his eyes squeezed shut in absolute defeat. The officers hauled him to his feet, reading him his Miranda rights in a brisk, monotone voice. As they began marching him down the center aisle, parading him past the staring eyes of my parents' entire congregation, Chloe completely lost her mind. The golden child, the woman who had spent her entire life prioritizing white validation and social status over her own blood, realized her entire identity was being dragged out the door in handcuffs. She spun around wildly, her tear-streaked face searching the room for a savior. Her eyes locked onto our parents, but Pastor Thomas and First Lady Eleanor were paralyzed with humiliation, hiding their faces from their own church members. Then Chloe's frantic gaze landed on me. I was standing tall in my emerald gown, perfectly composed, watching the destruction of her fake empire. Chloe lunged at me. She scrambled across the polished floor and threw herself at my feet, grabbing handfuls of my silk dress with her shaking, manicured hands. The sheer entitlement of her action was breathtaking. Just 20 minutes ago, she had ordered me to sit by the garbage cans. Now she was kneeling on the floor, clutching my clothes like a beggar. "Maya, you have to stop them!" Chloe sobbed hysterically, her tears leaving wet stains on the emerald fabric. "You have millions of dollars. You bought this entire estate. You can pay his bail. Call your corporate lawyers right now and get him out of there. You cannot let them put my husband in a federal prison." I looked down at her. Her expensive bridal updo had completely unraveled, dark streaks of mascara running down her lighter skin. She was sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Did you really just ask me to bail out the man who insulted my race, stole your dignity, and bankrupted your parents?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "He is my husband," Chloe wailed, digging her fingers tighter into my dress, refusing to let go. "We are family, Maya. You are my sister. You have to protect your family. You cannot just stand there and watch my life be destroyed when you have the power to fix it. Write a check. Pay the investors back. Just do something." "You are asking me to commit a felony by covering up his federal crimes," I stated, staring down at her tear-soaked face. "You want me to risk my private equity firm, my reputation, and my freedom, just so you can keep playing house with a white con artist who treats you like an accessory. You want me to sacrifice everything I built from the ground up just to save a man who thinks we are all beneath him." "He loves me," Chloe screamed, her voice bordering on absolute delusion. "You are just bitter because you do not have anyone. You are just being vindictive. Please, Maya, I am begging you. If he goes to jail, I will have nothing. I will be a laughingstock. Everyone in the church will know I married a fraud. You have to save me." I reached down, gripping her wrists with firm, unyielding strength. I pried her fingers off my dress one by one. She resisted, crying out in protest, but I did not stop until my gown was free from her desperate grasp. I took a step back, looking at the pathetic broken woman kneeling on the floor. You already have nothing, Chloe, I said coldly. And you are already a laughingstock. I am not opening my checkbook for a criminal, and I am certainly not opening it for you. Chloe let out a devastated wail, collapsing forward onto the marble floor. But her crying was immediately interrupted by another voice, one filled with pure, unadulterated panic. It was not Chloe. It was my mother. Eleanor pushed past the stunned guests and grabbed Chloe's shoulder, pulling her up from the floor. Eleanor's face was completely ashen, her eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond social embarrassment. She looked at me, her chest heaving, and the secret she had been hiding finally burst out of her trembling lips. Eleanor tried to speak, but her lips only trembled uncontrollably. Before she could spit out whatever desperate confession she had formulated, I ripped the last remaining piece of my emerald silk gown out from under Chloe's desperate hands. The violent jerk sent my sister sprawling backward onto the polished marble floor. She hit the ground with a heavy thud, her elaborate bridal veil tearing loose from her hair and tangling around her shoulders in a messy white cloud. Eleanor shrieked and immediately dropped to her knees to shield her precious golden child. She wrapped her arms around Chloe and glared up at me. Her eyes were filled with a venomous mixture of fear and absolute hatred. "How can you be so utterly heartless?" Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "She is your blood. Your own sister is begging for her life, and you just throw her to the ground like a dog. Have you no soul, Maya?" I looked down at the two women clutching each other amidst the ruins of their high society scam. My expression did not change. The coldness radiating from my chest felt like an absolute superpower. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel the lingering guilt that usually accompanied disappointing my mother. I felt nothing but a sharp, relentless clarity. "Do not talk to me about having a soul, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the federal agents securing the ballroom. "And definitely do not talk to me about family loyalty. I learned exactly what sisterhood meant to this family 9 years ago." Chloe froze, her sobbing instantly caught in her throat. Even through her hysterical panic, she knew exactly what I was talking about. She shrank behind our mother, her tear-streaked face suddenly shifting from desperation to sheer, unadulterated guilt. "You remember that night, do you not, Chloe?" I asked, stepping closer to them and forcing them to look at me. "The night you decided to take my car without asking. You were 20 years old, completely drunk off cheap vodka, and desperate to impress some wealthy fraternity boys from the north side. You ran a red light and smashed my car straight into a parked delivery truck. And then, because you have always been an absolute coward, you fled the scene. You ran all the way back to your college dorm room, climbed into bed, and left my wrecked car sitting in the middle of the intersection." The church elders standing nearby began to murmur loudly, their shocked faces turned toward the first lady of their congregation. Eleanor tried to wave her hands silently, begging me to stop talking in front of the deacons, but I refused to be silenced. The truth was pouring out of me like a flood, washing away decades of their toxic secrets. "The police showed up at my apartment at 3 in the morning. I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling so everyone could hear. "Because the car was registered in my name, they arrested me. I was hauled into the precinct, fingerprinted, and thrown into a holding cell like a common criminal. I called you Mother. I called you begging for help, telling you Chloe had stolen my keys. And what did you and Pastor Thomas do?" Eleanor swallowed hard, unable to meet the judging eyes of the congregation members watching her. "It was a complicated situation, Maya," she stammered defensively, her respectability politics crumbling in real time. "Chloe was applying for that prestigious communications internship. A hit and run on her record would have ruined her entire future. She was not built for that kind of scandal. So you forced me to take the fall." I fired back, leaning over them to ensure they felt the full weight of my anger. "You came to the police station and looked me dead in the eye. You told me that because my skin was darker, because I was built tougher. I could handle the criminal justice system better than your fragile, light-skinned angel. You told me that if I did not confess to being behind the wheel, you would refuse to co-sign the student loans I needed to finish my degree. You literally held my education hostage to protect a drunk driver." Chloe whimpered, burying her face against Eleanor's expensive silk shoulder. "That was a long time ago. Yeah. I was just a kid. I was scared. I did not know what to do. You were old enough to know right from wrong, I snapped. And I was only 23. I spent 2 nights in jail. I lost my academic honors standing. I had to empty my meager savings to pay the fines and the restitution for the damages you caused just to keep myself from being expelled from university. I almost lost my entire future because you were too scared to face the consequences of your own actions. You let me take the punishment while you paraded around church acting like a perfect, untouched saint. You survived it, Eleanor yelled, finally standing up to face me. She threw her hands in the air, her desperation making her reckless. Look at you now. You are rich. You are successful. It obviously did not ruin your life. Why are you holding on to such ancient history when your sister is losing her husband to a federal prison sentence right now? You are letting petty jealousy blind you to her suffering. Because that night was the greatest lesson I ever learned, I stated coldly, looking directly past my mother to lock eyes with Chloe. You taught me that blood means absolutely nothing when money and status are on the line. You taught me that if I ever stumbled, this family would happily step on my neck to keep themselves above water. You taught me how to be ruthless, little sister. And I am simply returning the favor. Chloe reached out again, her hands grasping at the empty air between us, begging for a lifeline I was never going to provide. But Maya, please, this is different. Preston is going to prison. My entire life is over. I will have nothing. I will be ruined. Then you will finally know exactly how I felt, sitting in that cold holding cell. I replied, offering her zero comfort. I am not bailing out your fraudulent husband. I am not writing a check to save your reputation. You wanted the old money lifestyle so badly that you ignored every glaring red flag. Now you get to enjoy the old money legal fees. I turned my back on them, dismissing their existence entirely. The federal agents were already marching Preston toward the main exit. His head was bowed, the heavy silver handcuffs glinting under the ballroom lights as he was paraded past the whispering crowd. The elite guests were scrambling toward the coat check, eager to escape the disaster zone before the local news vans arrived outside. I had successfully dismantled the fake empire that my parents and sister had built on my back. But the night was not over. The ultimate truth about my parents' financial desperation was still waiting to be dragged into the light, and I could see the sheer terror in my mother's eyes as she realized I was not going to stop until every single lie was burned to the ground. Eleanor lunged forward and clamped her hand over Chloe's mouth. The sudden violent gesture shocked the remaining guests. My mother was panting, her chest heaving against her expensive silk dress as she physically tried to silence her golden child. But Chloe was completely unhinged. The sight of Preston being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle just outside the ballroom doors had shattered her fragile grip on reality. She violently shoved our mother away, her acrylic nails scratching Eleanor's arm in the process. "You do not understand!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers and hitting every corner of the massive room. "Maya, you have to fix this right now. If Preston goes to federal prison, the startup goes into receivership. If the company is seized, Mom and Dad lose every single dime they gave him. They will be out on the street." The silence that blanketed the room was absolute. Even the federal agents who were finishing up their sweep paused to look over. My father, Pastor Thomas, let out a choked, guttural sound like a man who had just taken a bullet to the chest. He grabbed his chest, his knees buckling. "Shut up, Chloe," my father roared, his booming pastoral voice cracking with raw panic. Not another word. But the dam had burst, and Chloe was too terrified of losing her luxury lifestyle to care about protecting his pastoral image. "What money did you give him?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my father, forcing him to step back under the weight of my stare. "What money, Dad? You told me you could not afford to help me pay off my student loans because the church salary was too modest. You claimed you were barely scraping by. So what money did you give to a white con artist?" Chloe pointed a shaking finger at our parents, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "They gave him everything," she screamed, her voice bordering on demonic. "They took out a massive second mortgage on the house. They leveraged the entire property because Preston promised them a guaranteed 300% return before the wedding. He told them they would be multimillionaires by the end of the year." I stared at my parents. The house they had owned free and clear for 20 years, the house I grew up in, was now mortgaged to the hilt to fund Preston's embezzlement scheme. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. But knowing my parents, knowing their insatiable greed and their obsession with keeping up appearances, a second mortgage would not have been enough capital to secure Preston's attention. He was a high-level scammer, and they were the perfect marks. A second mortgage would only give him maybe $500,000, I stated coldly, doing the financial math in my head. Preston needed $2 million to cover his stolen investor funds. Where did the rest come from? Eleanor began to hyperventilate. She fell to her knees, grasping her chest, her carefully constructed First Lady persona disintegrating into dust. "Please, Maya," she wheezed. "Stop interrogating her. You are destroying us." "Where did the rest of the money come from?" I repeated, raising my voice so it commanded the attention of every single person left in the ballroom. "From the church," Chloe wailed, completely oblivious to the crowd of deacons and choir members standing just 10 feet away. Dad drained the congregation's emergency relief fund. He emptied the building renovation account. He took every single donation from the last 3 years and wired it directly to Preston's startup. He said God told him it was a righteous investment. He said it was our family's divine right to enter high society. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. I watched as Deacon Miller, a man who had trusted my father for 30 years, dropped his cane. His face contorted in absolute horror. Sister Washington, the choir director who baked pies for the church bake sales every weekend to raise those exact renovation funds, began to weep into her hands. My father had not just bankrupted his family. He had robbed his own people. He had stolen the hard-earned money of working-class black men and women, money meant for the community, money meant for charity, and he had handed it over to a racist white man simply because that man wore a tailored suit and offered them proximity to whiteness. Thomas Deacon Miller shouted, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it commanded the entire room. "You stole from the congregation. You stole from the widows and the orphans to fund this sham of a wedding." My father held up his hands, sweating profusely, backing away from his own church members. "It was a temporary transfer," he pleaded, his lies sounding pathetic and hollow. "Preston assured me the returns would double the church's treasury. I was trying to bless the congregation. I was trying to multiply our talents. You were trying to buy a white son-in-law?" I shot back, my voice slicing through his pathetic excuses like a scalpel. "You sold out your own people to buy a seat at a table that did not even exist. You looked down on my dark skin and my independence, calling me a burden, while you were actively embezzling from your own church to fund Chloe's delusion. You are certainly not a pastor. You are just a parasite." Eleanor crawled across the floor, her hands grasping at the hem of my emerald gown. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. "Maya, you have to save us," she begged, abandoning every ounce of her pride. "You have the private equity firm. You have the millions. You can replace the church funds before the board calls for a financial audit. You can easily pay off the second mortgage. You are absolutely our only hope." I stared down at her trembling hands clutching my dress. The grand ballroom of the Belmont estate was rapidly emptying. The heavy oak doors swung back and forth as the last guests scrambled out into the cool Chicago night. They were desperate to distance themselves from the flashing police lights reflecting through the stained glass windows. Outside, federal agents were loading Preston Sterling and his furious parents into government vehicles. Inside, the silence was deafening. Chloe was curled into a ball near the abandoned head table, sobbing uncontrollably into her ruined custom wedding gown. And at my feet, the First Lady of the congregation, a woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was too dark and too difficult to love, was on her knees begging for my money. I slowly pried Eleanor's fingers off my gown. I took a deliberate step back. "You want me to replace the church funds?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "You want me to pay off the second mortgage you secretly took out on your home? You want me to cover up a massive embezzlement scheme so you do not have to face the consequences of your own greed?" Eleanor scrambled to her feet. Her carefully styled hair was plastered to her sweaty forehead. "Yes, Maya," she demanded, her tone shifting back to that familiar, entitled maternal authority. "Yes, you have the money. You bragged about owning this entire $50 million estate. Paying off a $2 million debt is nothing to you. It is pocket change for your firm. You can make one phone call and fix this entire nightmare before the church board even realizes the accounts are empty. I crossed my arms, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my chest. You are actually ordering me to bail you out, I stated. After you shoved me by the trash cans. After you agreed with a racist white man. Eleanor threw her hands in the air. Do not bring up those petty slights right now, she yelled. This is about survival. I gave you life. I carried you for 9 months. I fed you and clothed you and kept a roof over your head. You owe us. You owe this family. You are obligated to protect us when we fall. That is what families do. They protect their own. Pastor Thomas finally found his voice. He pushed himself up from the overturned chair. He stumbled over to stand beside my mother, pointing a shaking finger at me. Your mother is right, my father barked. The federal investigators are going to start digging into Preston's accounts by tomorrow morning. When they trace the wire transfers, they will see that the church funds were moved into his startup. If you do not deposit that money back into the congregation treasury tonight, I will go to federal prison, Maya. You cannot send your own father to prison. I looked at the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder. They were united in their delusion. They honestly believed that because we shared blood, I was a human shield required to absorb their bullets. They did not feel an ounce of remorse for stealing from the working-class families in their congregation. They only felt panic that they had been caught. You are not asking me to protect you, I replied. You are demanding that I become an accomplice to your crimes. You want me to use my private equity firm to launder money back into a church account to cover your tracks. That is a federal offense. You are asking me to risk my entire empire, my freedom, and everything I built from the ground up, just to save you from a prison sentence you absolutely deserve. Eleanor slammed her hands against her thighs. Stop talking like a cold corporate lawyer, she screamed. We are your parents. The Bible says to honor your father and your mother. It is your divine duty to help us. If you walk away from us tonight, you are condemning us to homelessness and jail. We will lose the house and the church. We will have absolutely nothing. You cannot just stand there and watch the people who raised you lose everything they have. You did not raise me, I shot back. You tolerated me. You raised Chloe. You groomed her to be your perfect little socialite, and you used me as the punching bag. You took my college savings and handed it to her. You made me take the fall for her hit and run. You reminded me that my dark skin and natural hair were liabilities. You treated my independence like a disease because you could not control me the way you controlled her. I took another step toward them. And now that your golden child has brought a federal criminal into your home and bankrupted your entire existence, you suddenly remember that you have a second daughter. A daughter who happens to have a massive bank account. A daughter you think you can bully into paying your bills. Maya, please, my father begged. We made mistakes. We were blinded by Preston's promises. We wanted to elevate the family. We wanted to give Chloe a good life. But you are strong, Maya. You have always been the strong one. You can handle this. We cannot survive this scandal. If you do not pay off the bank, they will foreclose on our house by the end of the month. We will be out on the street. I am begging you as your father. Have mercy on us. I stared at the man who stole from his own flock to buy a seat at a white man's table. I stared at the mother who demanded I shrink myself to make her comfortable. They wanted mercy. They wanted a savior. But the daughter they were begging for did not exist anymore. She had died a long time ago, killed by 1,000 subtle insults and blatant betrayals. I stared down at the two people who were supposed to be my protectors. Eleanor was still kneeling on the cold marble floor. Her expensive fascinator hat skewed and crushed the very picture of the high society respectability she worshipped, now completely ruined. Pastor Thomas stood beside her, his broad shoulders slumped, the booming authoritative voice he used to command his massive congregation reduced to a pathetic, terrified wheeze. They looked like strangers to me. The illusion of their parental authority had been entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but two desperate, greedy people facing the catastrophic consequences of their own actions. Maya, please! Eleanor cried out, her hands grasping desperately at the empty air between us. You are punishing us for wanting a better life. We just wanted to elevate the family name. We made a miscalculation, we admit that now. But you cannot leave your own flesh and blood to be destroyed by the federal government and the banks. You have the power to fix this with one phone call. You have to forgive us because we are family. Elevate the family name. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. You did not want to elevate our name, Mother. You wanted to erase it. I took a deliberate step forward, my emerald gown swishing against the floor, forcing Pastor Thomas to flinch and step back. For 32 years, you made sure I knew exactly where I stood in your hierarchy, I said, my voice echoing relentlessly off the silent ballroom walls. I was the dark-skinned daughter, the one whose hair took too long to press, the one whose features were too ethnic, too sharp, too undeniable for your country club aspirations. You spent my entire childhood telling me I was too tough, too aggressive, and completely unlovable, unless I learned to shrink myself into a palatable, quiet background character. I pointed a manicured finger at Chloe, who was shivering in her ruined bridal gown near the collapsed VIP table. You poured all your love and every single dime of your money into Chloe because she had lighter skin and a desperate willingness to be whatever a wealthy man demanded. You groomed her to be a trophy. And when Preston Sterling walked into your church, you lost your absolute minds. He was mediocre. He was arrogant. He did not even respect your religion or your culture, but he was white. And he claimed to be old money. That was all it took for you to hand over your dignity. That is not true, my father stammered, sweat beading heavily on his forehead. We embraced Preston because he loved your sister. We wanted her to be financially secure. It was never about race or status. Do not lie to me in this room, I fired back, my voice slicing through his pathetic defense like a razor. When I closed my first $1 million corporate acquisition, I invited you both to my office to celebrate. You told me you were too busy organizing a church bake sale. You sat in our kitchen and told me my career was too masculine and that my financial independence was intimidating potential husbands. But when Preston leased a fake penthouse using stolen investor funds, you threw a massive church banquet in his honor. You stood at the pulpit, Dad, and told the entire congregation that God had blessed your family with aristocratic grace. You worshipped his whiteness so much that you literally handed him the deed to your home and the treasury of your church without running a single basic background check. Eleanor began to weep loudly, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the undeniable truth of my words. We were foolish, she wailed into her palms. We admit it. We were blinded by the promise of security and status. But we are paying the price now. You have made your point, Maya. You have humiliated us in front of everyone. Now do the Christian thing and show grace. Write the check and save our home. Grace is for people who actually repent, I stated coldly, looking down at her quivering form. You are not sorry for how you treated me. You are not sorry for the colorism, the financial abuse, or the emotional manipulation. You are only sorry that the white savior you bought and paid for turned out to be a federal criminal. You do not want forgiveness. You just want a blank check. Chloe finally lifted her head, her face a smeared, terrifying mess of expensive makeup and tears. If you do not pay the bank, they will take the house, Maya. Mom and Dad will have to live on the street. I will have nowhere to go because Preston's assets are being seized by the FBI right now. You cannot be this evil. Evil. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made my sister flinch. Is it evil to let adults face the consequences of their own financial greed? You stood in the hallway an hour ago and told me I belonged next to the trash cans. You told me my dark skin and independent energy were a stain on your perfect wedding aesthetic. You loved the fact that Mom and Dad drained their accounts for you. You soaked up every drop of their stolen money to buy your custom dress and your fraudulent diamond ring. You were perfectly happy to watch me struggle with brutal student loans while you drove a luxury vehicle paid for with my college fund. And now that the bill is finally due, you have the nerve to call me evil for refusing to pay it. I turned my attention back to my parents, my posture perfectly rigid, my spirit completely unbreakable. You gambled your home, your church, and your dignity on a racist con artist because you hated yourselves too much to believe in your own black daughter, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. You thought proximity to whiteness would save you from your own deep-seated insecurities. Instead, it absolutely bankrupted you. So you are just going to walk away? My father whispered the terrifying reality of his impending doom, finally crushing the last remaining fragments of his pride. You are going to let the bank foreclose on the house I built. You are going to let the federal investigators seize the church accounts and send me to prison. I am not letting them do anything, I stated, my eyes locking onto his with absolute zero sympathy. You did this. You willingly signed the second mortgage. You authorized the illegal wire transfers from the congregation fund. You handed your life savings to a thief just to buy a fake social status. I am simply refusing to be the human shield you used to avoid the explosion. The obligation you think I owe you is dead. I owe you nothing. I watched my father drop his heavy head into his trembling hands. The man who strutted across the pulpit every Sunday morning, demanding 10% of his congregation's income and demanding absolute obedience from his family, was now a hollow, broken shell. My mother remained on the floor, the heavy silk of her designer dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. I will not give you a loan, I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute authority in the empty ballroom. You have proven you cannot be trusted with capital. You stole from working-class families who trusted you with their salvation. You handed their hard-earned money to a criminal who looked down on you. My father looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. Then what are you offering, Maya? You said you would not let me go to prison. I said I would not let the congregation suffer for your sins. I corrected him, stepping back so my mother could not attempt to grab my dress again. I will contact the church board of directors tomorrow morning. My private equity firm will make an anonymous donation to the treasury that completely restores the emergency relief and renovation funds you selfishly drained. The church will be made whole. The federal investigators will have no missing church assets to prosecute you for when they audit Preston's startup. My parents exhaled in unison. Eleanor actually closed her eyes and whispered a loud prayer of thanks, already slipping back into her performative religion. She genuinely thought she had gotten away with it. She thought her tears had successfully manipulated the difficult daughter into opening her checkbook. But I was not finished. As for your house, I continued, pacing slowly in front of the ruined VIP table. I will contact the bank holding your second mortgage. I will purchase the debt in full. Oh, thank you, Jesus, my mother cried out, scrambling to her feet and reaching out to embrace me. I held up my hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. Do not thank him yet, mother. I am buying the debt, which means my firm is taking immediate possession of the property. I will own the house. You will not own a single brick, a single floorboard, or a single blade of grass on that manicured lawn. The deed will be transferred to MA Holdings by the end of the week. My father froze. His chest stopped heaving as the brutal reality of my words settled over him. You want to take our house. Maya, we built that house. We raised you in that house. You raised Chloe in that house, I snapped back, pointing to my sobbing sister on the floor. You housed me. There is a massive difference. And yes, I am taking it. You leveraged it to buy a white son-in-law. You lost that property the second you signed that fraudulent paperwork. I am simply stepping in as the new owner. Eleanor pulled herself up completely, her indignation momentarily overriding her panic. Owner, you expect your own parents to be your tenants. You want us to pay rent to our own daughter. That is completely unnatural. How will we explain this to the community? What will the church elders say when they find out the First Lady does not even own her own home? You will not explain anything to the community, I instructed coldly. You will keep your mouth shut and pretend you are still the owners if you want to maintain your precious optics. I know how much you value the illusion of wealth. But behind closed doors, you will sign a standard ironclad lease agreement. You will pay me market rate rent on the first of every single month. We cannot afford market rate rent on a pastor's salary, my father argued, his voice rising in fresh panic. The church board is already reviewing our expenses. We are stretched entirely too thin. Then I suggest mother gets a job, I replied effortlessly, enjoying the horrified gasp that escaped Eleanor's lips. Maybe she can work the cash register at a high-end boutique since she loves designer clothes so much. Or maybe you can sell off those ridiculous custom suits you wear to preach every Sunday. I do not care how you find the money, but you will pay me every 30 days. I leaned in close, making sure they saw the absolute finality burning in my eyes. I wanted them to understand that the dynamic had permanently shifted. If you are late by one single day, I will not call and remind you. I will not give you a grace period. I will not care about holidays or church events. I will serve you with a 30-day eviction notice. and I will have my security team throw your belongings onto the front lawn, right in full view of all your wealthy suburban neighbors. I will put you out on the street exactly like you tried to throw me out of this wedding." Chloe, who had been listening from the floor, let out a loud, dramatic wail. "You are a monster, Maya. You are actually enjoying this. You are tearing our family apart over money." I did not even look at her. "The family tore apart the day you decided my skin tone was a liability, Chloe. I am just sweeping up the debris you left behind." I looked back at my father. He was staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. He finally realized that the daughter he had marginalized for 3 decades was the most powerful person he would ever meet. He had no leverage. He had no alternate options to play. The federal government was currently seizing Preston Sterling's assets, and soon they would come looking for the missing church money. He was entirely at my mercy. "Do we have a deal?" I asked, my voice carrying the sharp, non-negotiable tone I used in corporate boardrooms. My father swallowed hard. He looked at my mother, who was silently weeping, completely broken by the reality of her new position in life. She was no longer the untouchable elite first lady of the congregation. She was a tenant living under the strict rule of the daughter she despised. "We have a deal," my father whispered, his voice completely defeated. His shoulders sagged as he surrendered the last ounce of his pride. "We will sign whatever you want. My lawyers will email you the lease agreement by morning," I said, turning my back on them. "Make sure you read the fine print. I do not tolerate late fees." I walked away, my emerald gown gliding smoothly over the marble floor. I did not look back at the ruined ballroom, the overturned chairs, or the broken family I was leaving behind in the shadows. I walked out of the Belmont estate and stepped into the cool Chicago night. My driver opened the door of the Maybach, and I slid into the luxurious back seat. The estate was mine. The leverage was mine. And for the first time in my entire life, the future was entirely mine. 1 week later, the crisp morning sun reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse corner office in downtown Chicago. From the 50th floor of the MA Holdings building, the city looked like a massive chessboard, and I was the one moving the pieces. I sat behind my sleek black marble desk, reviewing the final lease agreement my legal team had drafted for my parents. They had signed it yesterday without a single word of protest. The power dynamic in my family had officially and permanently shifted. The intercom on my desk beeped softly. My executive assistant Sarah spoke through the speaker, her voice laced with professional hesitation. "Maya, your sister is in the reception area. She does not have an appointment and security was going to escort her out, but she started crying hysterically in the elevator bay and causing a massive scene. She insists she needs to speak with you immediately." I set my pen down and leaned back in my leather chair. "Send her in," I commanded. A moment later, the heavy double doors of my office swung open. The woman who walked through them was practically unrecognizable from the glowing, arrogant bride I had left sobbing on the floor of the Belmont estate. Chloe looked completely haggard. The custom-beaded gowns and flawless makeup were entirely gone. She was wearing a pair of oversized faded sweatpants and a baggy gray hoodie. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, uneven bun, and the dark circles under her eyes told the story of a woman who had not slept since the federal agents hauled her fraudulent husband away in handcuffs. She stood in the doorway, staring at the sheer scale of my corporate empire. She looked at the expensive modern art on the walls, the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, and the absolute authority radiating from my desk. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of intimidation cross her face. But Chloe had been coddled and enabled for 29 years, and entitlement is a very difficult disease to cure. She marched across the plush carpet and collapsed heavily into one of the expensive guest chairs opposite my desk. She did not wait to be invited to sit. "I need your help," Chloe demanded, her voice lacking any of the humility her physical appearance suggested. "The FBI froze all of Preston's personal accounts. They seized the penthouse. They even took the diamond ring off my finger because it was purchased with stolen investor funds. I am currently living out of a suitcase in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, and the front desk just told me my credit card declined this morning." I folded my hands together and rested them on the cool marble surface of my desk. "That sounds like a terrible financial situation, Chloe. Have you tried asking Preston's aristocratic parents for a loan? Oh wait, I forgot. They are completely broke and their fake hedge fund is currently being liquidated by the federal government. Chloe slammed her hand against the armrest of the chair. Do not mock me, Maya. My life is falling apart. Preston is sitting in a federal detention center awaiting trial for wire fraud. I need to file for divorce immediately before the prosecutors try to implicate me in his embezzlement scheme. But I cannot afford a lawyer. I called 3 different luxury divorce firms in the city, and they all require a $50,000 retainer just to take my case. I have absolutely nothing. I stared at her, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. And what exactly does your lack of funds have to do with me? You are my sister Chloe, fired back, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate pitch. You owe me. If you had just kept your mouth shut at the wedding and paid the venue bill, none of this would have happened. You blew up my entire life because you wanted to prove a point. You exposed Preston. You ruined our parents' reputation at the church. You put me in this position. The least you can do is hire me so I can afford to clean up the mess you made. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely fascinated by the sheer audacity of her delusion. You want a job here, at my private equity firm? Yes, Chloe stated, lifting her chin and trying to summon the golden child arrogance she used to wield so effortlessly. I am still your sister. You own this entire skyscraper. You have hundreds of employees. You can easily create a high-paying vice president position for me on your executive floor. Give me a title and a 6-figure salary. I will use the sign-on bonus to pay my divorce lawyer, and I can start working next week. It is the absolute minimum you owe me after what you did. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch out between us. She actually believed her own lie. She honestly thought that after years of belittling my dark skin, insulting my independence, attempting to steal my college fund, and literally assigning me a seat next to the garbage cans at her wedding, she could just waltz into my corporate headquarters and demand a vice president title. She expected me to reward her lifetime of cruelty with a 6-figure salary. I let out a slow, deep breath, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of her request. Chloe, you really think you can walk into a multi-million-dollar financial institution wearing sweatpants and demand an executive position just because we share the same parents? I am family, she repeated stubbornly, her hands gripping the edges of the chair. You are supposed to take care of family. Mom and Dad are practically destitute because they have to pay you rent now. They cannot help me. You are the only one left. You have to give me this job. I deserve a corner office just like this one. You deserve exactly what you have earned, I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. And unfortunately for you, you have never earned a single thing in your entire life. Mom and Dad handed you everything on a silver platter. They praised you for just existing. You thought bagging a white man with a fake trust fund was your ultimate career achievement. You have no idea what it takes to survive in the real world. I opened a sleek silver drawer on the side of my desk. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I placed it face down on the marble surface. The trap was set, and Chloe was about to learn exactly how the real world worked. I flipped the single sheet of paper over and slid it across the smooth black marble toward her. Chloe looked down at the document. Her eyes scanned the top of the page and her defensive posture faltered. It was her own resume. I had instructed my human resources department to pull it from LinkedIn the moment security alerted me she was in the lobby. I wanted to have the physical proof of her utter incompetence sitting right in front of her. Take a good look at that document, I instructed, leaning back in my chair and observing her. You just demanded a vice president title and a 6-figure salary. So let us review your qualifications for a senior executive role at a billion-dollar private equity firm. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She pulled the sleeves of her baggy gray hoodie down over her hands. I have experience, she muttered defensively. I have a communications degree. I have worked in public relations. You have a degree that took you 6 years to complete because you failed basic statistics 3 times, I corrected her, my voice slicing through the quiet room. And every time you failed, Mom and Dad marched down to the university and accused the professors of being biased, rather than admitting their golden child refused to study. As for your experience, I pointed a manicured finger at the paper. You list a public relations internship from 5 years ago. You lasted exactly 3 months. You spent that entire summer taking selfies in the lobby, using the luxury Mercedes our parents bought you with my stolen college fund. You did not write a single press release. You did not manage a single campaign. Your only contribution to that firm was boosting their diversity quota for their website brochure. That is not true. Chloe snapped her face, flushing an angry, embarrassed red. I networked. I built relationships. That is how the corporate world works, Maya. It is all about who you know and how you present yourself. That is how your world works, I countered effortlessly. Your entire life strategy relied on weaponizing your lighter skin and your acceptable soft aesthetic to manipulate people into doing the work for you. You thought you could just smile, bat your eyelashes, and marry a wealthy white man so you would never have to look at a balance sheet or earn an honest paycheck. But your wealthy white man was a federal criminal. Your strategy just bankrupted our parents, cost them their dignity, and lost them their home. You have absolutely zero hard skills, Chloe. You do not know how to manage capital. You cannot run a financial audit, and you are currently sitting across from me, begging for a handout, because you do not even know how to balance a checking account. Chloe slammed both her hands down on my desk, her eyes filled with angry, desperate tears. You cannot talk to me like this. I am a black woman in crisis. I am your blood. You are supposed to uplift me. We are supposed to stick together when the world attacks us. The sheer hypocrisy of her statement was breathtaking. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Now you want to play the solidarity card, I asked, leaning forward so my face was just inches from hers. Now that you are wearing sweatpants and facing total ruin, suddenly we are just two black women who need to uplift each other. Where was that solidarity last week at the Belmont estate? You did not claim me when you were standing next to Preston. You stood in that service hallway and told me I was too dark, too aggressive, and too intimidating. You literally told me that men like Preston do not look twice at women like me. You happily threw me to the wolves because you thought proximity to white wealth made you better than your own sister. Chloe shrank back into her chair, unable to maintain eye contact. She stared down at her lap, her lip trembling as the reality of her past actions collided with her current desperation. So let me make this very clear, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper. Look around this office, Chloe. Look at the imported marble, the modern art, the view of the Chicago skyline. This is my empire. I built it with my own blood, sweat, and intellect while you were busy trying to erase your roots. And looking at you right now in your oversized hoodie and your unearned entitlement, I have to be honest. You do not fit the aesthetic of my executive floor. You belong by the trash. I threw her exact wedding words right back in her face. The impact was instantaneous. Chloe let out a loud, devastated sob, bringing her hands up to cover her face. She had finally been stripped of every single delusion she had ever held about her superiority. Right at that exact moment, a loud, obnoxious ringing sound pierced the heavy tension in the office. It was coming from the pocket of Chloe's sweatpants. She jumped, startled by the sudden noise, and scrambled to pull her cell phone out. She glanced at the caller identification, and her already pale face drained of whatever color was left. She quickly pressed the side button to silence the call, looking at me with pure terror in her eyes. Answer it, I commanded. It is just spam, she whispered, her voice shaking violently. Answer the phone, Chloe. I repeated, my tone leaving zero room for negotiation. Put it on speaker. Put it right here on my desk. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the device. She swiped the screen, tapped the speaker icon, and set the phone down on top of her fake resume. Hello, Chloe, said her voice cracking. Miss Williams, a harsh, irritated female voice blared through the speaker. This is the front desk manager at the Starlight Motel. I am calling to inform you that the credit card you placed on file for your extended stay has just been declined. We attempted to run it for the weekly rate, and the bank rejected the transaction entirely. I watched Chloe's chest heave as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. There must be a mistake, Chloe stammered. I just need to call my bank. Give me until this afternoon. We do not do grace periods, Miss Williams, the motel manager, replied coldly. Your checkout time was 11 o'clock. Since payment failed, our housekeeping staff has already packed up the 2 suitcases you left in the room. They are sitting outside by the dumpster in the back alley. If you do not come and retrieve them within the next hour, we are throwing them away. Do not try to access the room again, or we will call the police for trespassing. The line clicked and went dead. The busy signal echoed loudly in my silent, luxurious office. Chloe stared at the black screen of her phone. She was completely paralyzed. She had no husband, no wealthy in-laws, no supportive parents to drain, and now she did not even have a cheap motel room. Her suitcases were sitting by a dumpster, which was a beautiful, poetic piece of irony, considering where she had tried to seat me at her wedding. She had absolutely nothing. She was entirely at my mercy, and she finally realized that I possessed absolutely none. I kept my eyes locked on her terrified face as the dial tone blared from her silenced phone. I reached across the smooth marble surface of my desk and ended the call with a single tap of my finger. The sudden quiet in my penthouse office felt heavy and absolute. Chloe sat frozen in the expensive guest chair. Her oversized gray hoodie seemed to swallow her whole. The golden child of our family. The woman who just last week paraded around in a custom beaded gown, judging my dark skin and my independence, was now effectively homeless. I opened the second drawer of my desk. The smooth metal glided silently on its tracks. I pulled out a standard plain manila folder. I did not rush. I took my time opening it and extracting a single staple-bound document. I slid it across the marble desk, placing it right on top of her fraudulent resume. "What is this?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling so badly the words barely formed. "That is your lifeline," I stated, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "It is an employment contract. You came here demanding a high-paying vice president position to fund your luxury divorce lawyer. You told me I owed you a six-figure salary because we share the same parents. But since we just established that your only real skill is riding on the coattails of a federal criminal, I had my human resources department draw up a position that actually matches your qualifications." Chloe hesitantly reached out with shaking hands. She picked up the document. Her eyes darted across the bold text at the top of the page. I watched her read the job title and the location. Her jaw dropped open. A fresh wave of horrified tears welled in her eyes. "A receptionist." Chloe choked out, dropping the paper back onto the desk as if it had burned her fingers. "You want me to be a receptionist at a discount extended stay motel in the south suburbs? Maya, this area is terrible. This is one of the worst neighborhoods in Chicago. I cannot work there. My private equity firm recently acquired that distressed property portfolio." I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "We are restructuring the management. They currently need a front desk clerk for the graveyard shift. The hours are 11 at night to 7 in the morning. You will be checking in truck drivers and hourly tenants. You will wear a polyester uniform and a plastic name tag." She stared at me in pure disbelief. "And the pay," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the compensation clause on the second page. "This is minimum wage. You are a multimillionaire, Maya. You own this entire skyscraper. You cannot seriously expect your own sister to work the night shift at a budget motel for minimum wage. I will not be able to afford a divorce lawyer with this. I will barely be able to buy groceries." "Then I suggest you learn how to budget," I replied coldly. "You spent your entire life mocking my financial struggles while Mom and Dad drained my college fund to buy your luxury cars. You laughed when I worked overnight shifts to pay off my student loans. You told me my ambition was aggressive and unattractive. Now you get to experience exactly what it feels like to build a life from absolute zero." Chloe shook her head violently. Her messy bun came completely undone, letting her unwashed hair fall around her face. "I cannot do this," she sobbed, gripping the armrests of her chair. "I am Chloe Williams. I am the First Lady daughter. I married a Sterling. I cannot be seen working a minimum wage job in a bad neighborhood. My friends will laugh at me. The church congregation will talk about me. I will be completely ruined." "Your friends were only your friends because they thought you had access to a hedge fund," I countered, effortlessly slicing through her pathetic delusions. "The church congregation already knows your husband is a felon and our parents are broke. You are already ruined, Chloe. The only choice you have left is whether you want to be ruined with a paycheck or ruined while sleeping on a park bench." She let out a loud, desperate wail, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Maya," she begged, her voice muffled by her palms. "Please do not do this to me. I know I was awful to you at the wedding. I know I stood by while Mom and Dad mistreated you. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just give me a small loan. Give me enough to get an apartment and a good lawyer. I promise I will pay you back." I will never bother you again. Just please do not make me do this. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. For 32 years, she had actively participated in my emotional destruction. She had weaponized colorism to elevate herself while pushing me down. She had gladly accepted every stolen dollar our parents handed her. She had tried to banish me to the hallway trash cans simply because my presence offended her racist white in-laws. And now she was using fake tears to try and manipulate her way out of the consequences. I picked up a heavy silver pen from my desk organizer. I held it out toward her. Your suitcases are currently sitting by a dumpster in a back alley. I stated, my voice carrying the absolute finality of an executioner. Your credit cards are declined. Preston is facing 15 years in federal prison. Mom and Dad are my tenants and they cannot afford to house you. You have absolutely no one left to manipulate. You either sign this contract right now and report to your shift tonight, or you walk out of this building and navigate the streets of Chicago with nothing but the sweatpants you are wearing. Chloe stared at the silver pen in my hand. Her chest heaved with violent, ragged sobs. She looked around the massive, luxurious office, searching for any sign of a rescue that was never going to come. She looked back at my face and finally saw the terrifying truth. I was completely empty of forgiveness. Her shaking hand slowly reached across the desk. She took the silver pen from my fingers. She pulled the employment contract closer to her, dragging the paper across the black marble. Hot tears spilled from her eyes and splashed directly onto the signature line, blurring the dark ink. She gripped the pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. With a devastating broken whimper, she signed her name at the bottom of the page. She had officially surrendered her golden child status. She was now a minimum wage employee working the graveyard shift for the sister she had spent her entire life trying to destroy. I pulled the contract back across the desk and examined the signature. I nodded once, slipping the document back into the manila folder. Sarah, I called out, pressing the intercom button on my desk. Yes, Maya, my assistant answered instantly. Please escort our new front desk clerk to the service elevator. I commanded, my eyes locked onto Chloe's devastated face. Provide her with the address for the South Suburb Motel property and give her $20 in cash so she can take the public bus to retrieve her suitcases from the dumpster. Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. You are making me take the bus, she choked out, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. You do not fit the aesthetic of my corporate car service, I replied coldly, turning my attention to my computer monitor. Do not be late for your shift tonight, Chloe. The motel manager docks pay for tardiness. You are dismissed. I did not look up as the heavy oak doors opened. I listened to the sound of my sobbing sister shuffling out of my office, her spirit completely broken, her fake empire burned to ash. The doors clicked shut, leaving me alone in my penthouse. The scapegoat had officially become the boss, and the vengeance was absolutely flawless. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the penthouse. I stood up and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sprawling grid of downtown Chicago. The city moved on completely unaware of the absolute destruction that had just taken place within these four walls. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. For 32 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my family's projected insecurities. I had absorbed their deep-seated colorism, their financial abuse, and their desperate need for white validation. But standing here now, looking at the financial empire I built with my own intellect and my own hands, I realized that their toxic shadow could no longer reach me. The wounded scapegoat was dead. The boss had taken her place. The following weeks unfolded with brutal poetic justice. The federal government does not offer lenient plea deals to arrogant con artists who steal from working-class investors. Preston Sterling, the golden boy. My parents had literally mortgaged their souls to impress, was quickly indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. His high-priced corporate lawyers abandoned him the exact moment his fake hedge fund accounts were seized by the authorities. I was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, stripped of his tailored tuxedos and his fabricated aristocratic pedigree. As for my parents, Pastor Thomas and First Lady Eleanor, Their spectacular fall from grace became the ultimate cautionary tale in our community. They kept their physical house, but they lost absolutely everything that actually mattered to them. Their precious social standing evaporated the moment the church board of directors discovered the truth. My private equity firm had made an anonymous donation to replace the emergency funds my father had stolen, but the financial audit exposed his actions anyway. The congregation immediately ousted him from the pulpit, stripped of his pastoral authority and her high society status. My parents now live in absolute terror of the first of every month. They scramble to collect their meager pension checks to pay market-rate rent to the very daughter they once banished to the hallway. They know that if their payment is even 1 hour late, I will execute the eviction clause without a second thought. They are prisoners in their own home, constantly reminded that they exist entirely at my mercy. And then there was Chloe, my beautiful light-skinned golden child sister, the woman who thought her aesthetic and her proximity to whiteness made her untouchable. She actually showed up for her first graveyard shift at the South Suburb Motel. She had no other choice. Her bank accounts were frozen, her credit was destroyed, and her fake billionaire husband was locked in a federal holding cell. My property managers sent me the security footage from her first night on the job. I watched her stand behind the scuffed front desk wearing a stiff, ill-fitting blue polyester uniform with a cheap plastic name tag pinned to her chest. The contrast between that cheap uniform and the custom-beaded wedding gown she wore just weeks ago was staggering. She looked exhausted, her unwashed hair pulled back, staring blankly at the lobby walls as she checked in tired truck drivers and hourly tenants at 2 in the morning. She had spent her entire life trying to avoid hard work, relying entirely on the labor and resources of others. Now she was earning minimum wage, forced to count every single penny, just to afford a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. The pedestal our parents had placed her on had been completely pulverized, and she was finally learning the true harsh cost of survival. I closed my laptop, shutting out the security feeds and the bank statements. My work here was permanently finished. I grabbed my emerald green wool coat, draped it over my shoulders, and grabbed my leather briefcase. I walked out of my executive suite, took the private elevator down 50 floors, and stepped out through the revolving glass doors of my corporate headquarters. The crisp, biting air of the Chicago night hit my face, refreshing and brilliantly alive. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds against the dark sky. As I stood on the curb, a sleek midnight black Bentley silently pulled up to the entrance. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out onto the pavement. Marcus was 35 years old, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal topcoat, and possessed a quiet, unshakable confidence. He was a highly successful corporate attorney, a deeply grounded, powerful black man who had spent the last 2 years supporting me, loving me, and celebrating every aspect of my identity. I was my real fiancé, the man I had intentionally kept completely hidden from the toxic, grasping claws of my family. I never wanted their desperation or their colorism to touch the beautiful, authentic partnership we had built. Marcus walked around the hood of the Bentley, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an ocean of warmth and absolute respect. He reached out gently, taking my briefcase from my hand, and opened the passenger side door for me. "Is the trash taken care of?" Queen Marcus asked, a knowing, affectionate smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I paused, looking back at the towering skyscraper behind me, and then at the man who had always recognized my worth long before I owned a private equity firm. The heavy chains of my past were officially broken. I was no longer the unlovable daughter, the aggressive sister, or the financial safety net for greedy people. I was entirely, beautifully free. "Completely," I replied, flashing him a brilliant, unobstructed smile. "Let us go home." Marcus returned my smile, closing the heavy car door behind me with a solid, satisfying thud. He slid into the driver's seat, the powerful engine purring to life. As the Bentley pulled away from the curb and merged into the vibrant, glowing flow of downtown traffic, I leaned back against the plush leather. I watched the Chicago city lights streak past the window, carrying me far away from the shadows of my family and driving me straight into a future that was flawlessly, undeniably mine. The greatest lesson from this journey is that your value is never determined by those who actively try to diminish it. Toxic family dynamics rooted in superficial status will thrive only when you allow yourself to be their scapegoat. Real power comes from walking away from tables where respect is no longer served and building your own empire in silence. Financial independence and absolute confidence are your ultimate weapons against manipulation. You do not owe loyalty to people who offer you nothing but betrayal. If this story of reclaiming power resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and comment down below.